Chapter 44. I think you two suit each other. Max tilde. Luke scrunched his nose up as he glanced at Cosette, only to see her jump and rush outside the convenience store. He stayed on the spot, exchanging looks with Maxen, who was standing outside and studying him. He's not her boyfriend, right? He wondered, watching Cosette stand beside Maxen before he went outside. What are you doing here? Asked Maxen, which Luke overheard as he was exiting the convenience store. I told you I want to hang out with you. But I won't be off until lunchtime. Then I'll wait. Maxen let out a sharp exhale as he glanced at the person standing behind her. Your friend. Oh, Luke, Cosette clapped as she turned her head around and smiled. Luke, this is Maxen, my classmate. Maxen, this is Luke. Hey, Luke saluted slightly while he gazed at Maxen from head to toe. It was impossible for Cosette to like him, he thought. Luke, it's all right with you if we wait for Maxen to finish, right? She asked with a smile, raising her brows as she anticipated Luke's reply. The latter blinked twice before he rocked his head on instinct, having quite a few questions in mind, but kept it to himself for now. See, Luke came by this morning to hang out with us. Cosette grinned while Maxen cast her a judgmental look. We can wait until lunchtime. His lips opened as his eyes darted between Cosette and the charming boy next to her. Maxen rocked his head as he wasn't even surprised anymore that Cosette was already here. Luke probably wanted to hang out with her, but she brought him here instead. You don't have other plans? He asked, setting his eyes on Cosette, and she simply shook her head. If I do, we wouldn't be here waiting for you. Maxen sighed and then nodded. All right, see you later. Later's tilde, Cosette waved her hand, watching Maxen return to the construction site. Don't run away, all right, hee. Luke's face contorted as he heard Cosette's last remarks. He was staring at her until she finally noticed his undivided attention. Yes, her brows rose at his prolonged gaze. Your classmate, are you dating him? He asked without beating around the bush, making her lips stretch from ear to ear. I wish, he frowned while she giggled after her reply, but Maxen doesn't like me. I'm mostly pestering him. Cosette pivoted on her heel as she faced the construction site. I'm just worried since he's underage and is already doing this heavy labor. Cozy, you're kidding, right? He replied after a moment, causing her to look back at him, that you wish you're dating that fatty. Luke, a frown instantly dominated her face. Please don't call Maxen names, he is my friend. He pressed his lips and shrugged. Sorry. It's all right, she sighed as she studied Luke. She couldn't blame him since Luke was always like that, even in the novel. I already appreciate that you haven't left me alone, she added with a smile. Leave you alone with him, Luke mumbled and set his eyes on the construction site across the street. Is it even legal for a minor to work in such a place? It's not, but Maxen will be in trouble if we told the authorities about it. He cast her a side-eye, noticing the genuine concern in her eyes. Luke had thought of many things she planned on doing today, but never once did he ever consider her plan was to hang out with someone, a guy at that. Still, he wanted to stay since Cosette had already made an effort. With that being said, Cosette and Luke waited for Maxen inside the convenience store. As they did, they also consumed quite a few snacks and talked about anything random. I didn't know you liked ice cream. Luke glanced at the ice cream wrappers she was placing inside a plastic bag. Cosette giggled as she shrugged happily. Well, I was always restricted to eat things in her previous life, was what she meant, but well, the real Cosette was often on a strict diet as well. But now, I don't care anymore. I'm lucky I have a fast metabolism that I don't gain weight even if I eat a feast. I noticed, he nodded, recalling Cosette had a huge appetite even during breakfast. Luke propped the bottom of his palm against his chin, eyes through the transparent glass wall. I've been to construction sites in the past. What is your classmate doing there? I don't know, but whatever it is, I'm worried since Maxen shouldn't be working multiple jobs. Don't he have a family? Cosette faced him while biting her lower lip, teary-eyed. I want to adopt him. Ha, he laughed awkwardly, as it seemed Maxen was pitiful, so he only got himself. Max only got himself to support himself. Cosette sighed as she leaned her arms over the table. I want to be there for him. Why? Why do you want to be there for him? Luke clarified his question. I don't think you like him, but pity is something I wouldn't want if I were in his shoes. I don't pity him. I think you do. If you don't, then you wouldn't feel sad about his situation, but you'll see it as something admirable, he explained. I'm not the one to talk, but I don't like it when you think you like him when I like you. Huh? She cocked her head to the side, blinking almost innocently, as she somehow didn't get his last remarks. I mean, you shouldn't mistake being sympathetic to something special. You said you will marry me once we grow older. Later. Also, we're compatible. So yeah. See, everything I said makes sense. Cosette blinked countless times as she stared at Luke and how he spoke with a straight face. Just when she thought he was imparting his hidden wisdom to her, it turned out he simply didn't like the idea of Cosette having a crush on Maxen. Well, it was not like she didn't have a crush on Maxen, but she also had a crush on Luke. Hee, in the end, she simply chuckled while shaking her head mildly. You and Maxen will get along. She believed Luke and Maxen would get along despite their differing personality. However, that idea was easily squashed down when Maxen finally joined them, and they were having lunch at the nearest food shop. Cosette darted her eyes to Maxen on her left, and then at Luke on her right. The two were sitting across from each other while she was in the middle. She cleared her throat to catch their attention, but to no avail. She could even hear the buzzing, invisible electricity clashing in the middle. Hello. She knocked on the table mildly as the two hadn't spoken a word since Maxen joined them. I think it's too early for Luke and Maxen to be friends. She thought since Luke had shown hostility towards Maxen, and the latter was distant, like always. Your name is Max? Asked Luke after some time, breaking the tension between them. The latter simply rocked his head and shrugged as an answer. I like cozy. Later. Luke crossed his arm and lifted his chin. If you like her, then don't even think we'll be friends. Who said I want to be your friend? Maxen laughed weakly and then glanced at Cosette. Did you just come here to say that? No, I didn't even know we'll be having a chaperone on this date. Luke, what are you saying? Myriads of question marks hovered over her head as her brain was still processing his words. I'm making my claim, obviously, answered Luke. Sure, she's all yours and tells her to stop bothering me. Ray, really? Luke's eyes slightly went wide as if he didn't expect such a nonchalant reply from Maxen. He watched Maxen let out a sigh as he picked up the cutlery, and then at Cosette, who wasn't even surprised or offended by Maxen's remarks. Luke, Max only wants me to stop pestering him, she dawdled while focusing on Luke, not noticing the brief glance from Maxen. But she was still smiling as if that didn't matter, and she had already accepted it would take a long time before she completely get Maxen's trust. But it's not like that will stop me from bothering him. Hee. Cozy, how can you do that to me, your future husband? Luke, you're not my future husband, you're not even my boyfriend, we just met yesterday. It's love at first sight. While Luke and Cosette were talking about love, as if it was as simple as that, Maxen ate while darting his eyes between the two. It was not like he particularly liked Luke, but compared to him, Luke and Cosette looked better together. They were both good-looking, and since she was her friend, Maxen already knew Luke was an elite. Max, are you all right? Maxen snapped his eyes when Cosette faced him squarely, staring at him with genuine wonder in her eyes. You're zoning out. He cleared his throat and nodded. Yes, I think you two suit each other. Ha, Luke clapped. Now I understand why you like him. Meanwhile, Cosette frowned slightly as she leaned back. She said nothing while Luke was getting chummy with Maxen all of a sudden, seeing that Maxen was a little annoyed at him. But was being lenient, her lips curled up into a subtle smile. I think you two suit each other, she blurted out, watching the two look back at her. BL. Chapter 45, Young Love Triangle. Cosette never thought she would ever regret mentioning anything about boys' love. As an avid reader, she had also taken the Tao of the inevitable. Hence, while watching Luke and Maxen, a hidden part of her tingled with excitement, and she couldn't help but ship them in her head. The only problem was she didn't intend to voice it out, but she did. Now she was paying for the price. Cosette wore a horrified expression, looking to her left and then to her right. Maxen and Luke were standing several steps away from her, Maxen on her left, Luke on her right. Ever since she told them they suit each other, the two of them kept their distance from each other. They stayed close to her as they were in the park earlier, but somehow, the two ended up keeping their distance from her as well. Now here they were, waiting for the bus with the three of them at a great distance from each other. She kept looking from left to right before she huffed. Do I disgust you that much just because I like reading boy stories? Maxen and Luke froze, turning their heads in her direction as if their necks were rusting irons. No, they answered in unison, but he disgusts me. What? Luke gasped in dismay as he looked at Maxen from head to toe. I disgust you, me, the great second young master Luke. Wow, the nerve. Maxen simply scrunched his nose up slightly and looked away to avoid trouble. It was not like he was the only person who said he was disgusted. It was a mutual feeling. No matter how good-looking Luke was, Maxen simply didn't want to give Cosette a ridiculous idea he never fathomed she would even be into. Hey, are you ignoring me? Luke dramatically gasped before Cosette looked at him with a frown. Luke, you sound like a dramatic wife. He nearly choked as his eyes dilated at her remarks. It's better if you just stay away from each other for now. Goodness, I was just joking, but you two took it seriously. It's nothing to be so defensive about. Later. Luke and Maxen gazed at her in dismay, making her brows raise as she took a cautious step back. Maxen's gaze was something she was getting used to, but not this kind of gaze from him. And now, Luke as well. I'm sorry, Cosette raised her hands up in defense as she lowered her head. I'll shut my mouth. She zipped her lips and pressed them into a tight slash. Cosette held her hand behind her, rocking her feet back and forth as she waited for the bus to arrive. Their day wasn't much, but it was already enough for her to know Maxen had eaten lunch and wasn't in trouble. Her lips hooked up into a subtle smile as she watched the cars speed through the road. Luke didn't complain much, at least all he did was raise the question, how come this is fun, while they were in the park to take a walk. She once again glanced in Maxen's direction, and then at Luke, who was still clearly riled up. Still, her smile stretched. Their first bonding wasn't that bad. I should plan our next bonding properly. She mentally nodded while grazing her chin. I didn't plan things properly since I didn't expect Luke to come by in our house, and knowing Maxen, he should rest than use his energy in traveling and such. Right, I should schedule it on days he doesn't have work, she mumbled before snapping her eyes when the loud screech rang in her ears as the bus stopped in front of them. Finally, Luke hailed as he hopped forward, only to take several steps back to give way for the passengers going out of the bus. Cosette giggled as she stood beside him, elbowing his side. Why are you so riled up, Luke? She humored. I was just kidding. Jays, your jokes are really scary, Cozy. Cosette giggled as she gazed ahead, watching the last passenger exit the bus. But before they could enter, Maxen stood beside her, which she thought he would bid her farewell. Hey, you don't have to say goodbye, we'll be fine. Her eyes went round as her breath hitched briefly when Luke suddenly hooked his arm over her shoulder, pulling her back to him. See you, never. Luke waved happily before he dragged her towards the entrance of the bus. As they were taking the step up, Cosette snapped her eyes and looked at him. Wait, she immediately wiggled her way out of his grip and clicked her tongue. I still have reminders. Huh, what are you doing? Asked Luke, while Cosette abruptly halted from speaking as Maxen took the step up and rode the bus. I need to make sure she arrives home safely. Maxen jerked his chin while keeping his cold front. You're keeping the bus from moving. Go. This little. Let's go. Cosette patted Luke's back and pushed him mildly with a big smile on her face. In the end, Luke was unable to complain, since the driver also urged them to pay and enter. Maxen smirked triumphantly when Cosette had to pay for Luke, and made sure that the latter would notice that taunting smirk. Let's go, let's go. While Cosette was busy pushing Luke inside, she didn't notice that his face had already gone red. Maxen chuckled as he shrugged mischievously, enjoying the thought that Luke couldn't even have the leisure to express his histrionic sentiments. Unlike usual, the seats were still mostly filled, so they didn't have a choice but to sit in the back. Since Luke was the first in the three of them, he perched on the window side, Cosette in the middle, while Maxen was in the other corner, far away from the two of them. Cosette gazed at Maxen, who was, as usual, leaning on his side, arms crossed. His eyes were on the window on the seat in front of him, silent, and seemed to be detached from this world like usual. A shallow breath slipped past her lips. Did he really plan to walk us home? She wondered, as she didn't expect that he would when he just said he still had another part-time. Max, she called airily, keeping her voice down to not disturb the other passengers. Maxen. He quirked a brow and cocked his head back, eyes on her. He mouthed, what? Cosette pressed her lips into a thin line and looked around. She then dragged her buttocks near him until she was close enough to him. Didn't you say you have a part-time? She asked out of plain curiosity. Won't you be late if you walk us home? My boss texted me and he said he won't be opening the shop. Oh, she rocked her head in understanding, lips forming an O shape. Then, does that mean you can stay with us longer? No. She frowned. Why? I only plan to make sure you arrive home without that guy abducting you. He pointed at Luke with his chin, causing her to look back at the latter, who was busy grumbling. I will go home right after. You can stay in our house." "No, thanks." Cosette opened her mouth to argue with him, but ended up shutting her lips closed. All she could do was huff and lean back, thinking of ways to make Maxen stay in the Blac's residence tonight. If he didn't have other things to do, it was better if he just rest in a more comfortable place, even just for tonight. She hadn't seen his place, but even if she wouldn't base it on the novel, Maxen was surely staying in a place that barely had a roof over him. Her thoughts were cut off when she heard Luke's voice. "Cozy, what are you doing there?" he asked before he sprawled his arms and grabbed her arm. "Sit here." The second Luke pulled her arm for her to sit near him, Maxen suddenly held her other arm to stop her. Cosette, who was appalled at Maxen's action, raised her dilated eyes at him. "Stop forcing her, will you?" he muttered in irritation, judging eyes on Luke. "It won't kill you if you ask her nicely instead of dragging her like that." "Ha, I'm not forcing Cozy." "Then what do you call grabbing her arm and suddenly pulling her the second you told her to sit next to you, even before she can give her consent?" Luke laughed in ridicule as his eyes sharpened in anger, glaring daggers at Maxen. The latter wasn't the person to back down, as he held Luke's ridiculing glares with a cold front. Cosette, who was mortified at this seemingly young love triangle in other people's eyes, gazed at the people in the front who were looking back in their direction. "Heh, he." Luke and Maxen furrowed their brows as they glanced in the front. Seeing the eyes watching them, Luke suddenly let her go, but Maxen carefully did. And so, it was the most awkward bus ride Maxen, Cosette, and Luke had ever experienced. Chapter 46, Oh Youth. Cosette was mortified throughout the bus ride, as she kept hearing whispers criticizing the youngsters nowadays. She wanted to defend all the youth they were stereotyping, but her tongue kept rolling back to her throat. In the end, she kept her head hung low until they reached their destination. Not just her, but Luke and Maxen also kept quiet the entire ride, so as soon as they left the bus from hell, Maxen cleared his throat. "Your ride is here, right?" He looked around to search for any car that was parked, waiting for her like usual. "That's the one." Maxen pointed at the car parked several feet away from the shade they were standing under. It wasn't like the car that fetched her before, but Cosette's family owned several vehicles. Cosette snapped back from her trance and shook her head to keep her composure together. She raised her head and gazed in the direction he was pointing at. "No," she furrowed her brows and glanced at Maxen, only to see him avoiding her gaze. "Maxen, I didn't tell Mr. George to fetch me," she explained, but Maxen just rocked his head without looking at her. "Will you walk us home?" "No." "Heck." Maxen and Luke spoke at the same time, causing her to dart her eyes between them. Luke scrunched his nose and clicked his tongue in irritation. "Cozy, it's already enough to let him ride with us. Why does he need to walk us back to your house?" Luke gasped in disbelief, having enough of this love triangle. He then jerked his chin at Maxen. Can you read the mood? She's already near her home. You don't have to come with us." Maxen frowned but nodded in agreement. He didn't want to spend another second with Luke. It was already awkward as it was, and he had also enough with that brat's whining. However, seeing Maxen's reaction, Cosette skipped a step and held his arms, making the latter freeze on the spot. "Luke, why are you so mean at Maxen?" she asked almost innocently, looking at him with doe eyes. "Maxen said he will make sure I am safe. I feel unsafe around you." "What?" Luke nearly choked. Did he fail to mention he was a black belter? Cosette ignored Luke as she faced Maxen squarely, gripping his arm tightly. She flashed him with the most pitiful puppy eyes she could ever make to get his sympathy. "Max, you don't trust Luke, right? He is rich and he might take me home. I cannot go with him all alone," she exclaimed, rendering Luke speechless while Maxen's brain was overheating at her grip around his arm. When Maxen recovered at the tug on his arm, his face crumpled as he pulled his arm away from her. A frown instantly dominated her face at the complicated expression in his eyes, as if she disgusts him. "Don't," his breath hitched before he cleared his throat to fix his stuttering. "Don't cling to me like that." "Hey Cozy, why do you make me sound so bad, eh? Also, he's right. Don't cling to this fatty." Luke accidentally bit his tongue when Cosette glared at him. "Luke," her voice was oddly low, sending a chill down Luke's spine. Cosette huffed and clicked her tongue, a little upset that Luke had been harassing Maxen unprovoked. Even though she was glad, Luke was quite lenient to Maxen than his usual savagery in the novel. Enough was enough. Luke was going too far. But before Cosette could open her mouth to scold the heated Luke, a car suddenly stopped in front of them. She blinked twice, setting her eyes on the black sedan as the tinted window rolled down, revealing a dashing man in a suit sitting in the back passenger seat. Papa, her face brightened up the second she recognized who was that handsome creature inside. Cosette jumped towards the door, bending over to flash Conrad a blinding sweet smile. "What are you three doing here?" asked Conrad, glancing at the two young boys standing behind her and under the shade. Maxen, as usual, bowed, while Luke was too annoyed at something, barely greeted Conrad. "We are on our way home." Cosette sighed as she frowned, not noticing her upset expression caused her father's eyes to darken. "Then, get in." Conrad tipped his head without hearing why the three were idling here instead of walking home. Before Maxen could refuse, he continued. "You three," his eyes glossed over the reluctant Maxen and the shocked Luke, his tone firm and commanding. "Get in, don't make me repeat myself." Cosette shivered at the coldness in her father's voice, eyes round. She only heaved a sigh of relief when he nodded at her encouragingly. "But can we fit in?" she asked, knowing the four of them would fit in the back passenger seat if they squeezed into each other. Conrad wouldn't like that, right? "Yes," Conrad nodded before setting his eyes on the person sitting in the front passenger seat. "Warren, do some stretching outside." Warren, Conrad's executive assistant, was speechless as he glanced in the rear mirror. Seeing Conrad's poker face, not showing the slightest remorse for dropping him off to walk back to the Black residence, Warren looked back with a frown, but Conrad was unfazed, tipping his head to the door. "I will ask someone to fetch you." "Thank you, Mr. Warren." Cosette smiled mischievously before hitching inside and joining her father. Warren's frown grew deeper and simply dragged his feet out of the car. "Boss," Warren sighed deeply as he looked back inside, only to see the father and daughter duo not caring about him. "Who am I to complain? I'm just an assistant." Warren was mumbling before he noticed the two young teens standing under the shade. Another deep exhale slipped past his lips before he sported a polite smile. "Second young Master Quinn, please get in." He motioned his arm as if his sacrifice was his own idea, shifting his eyes at Maxen. "Sir Cloven." "Geez," Luke stomped his feet after casting Maxen a glare, riding inside the back passenger seat as he wouldn't let Maxen taint even Conrad. As he did so, Warren furrowed his brows but was not surprised at the explosive mood of the second young master of the Quinn family. Luke was notorious for his temperament, the reason people usually compared him to his older brother since Asher was very mature at his age, just like how Cosette was in the past. So Warren didn't dwell on it as he shifted his focus on Maxen to make sure he was all right. "Sir Cloven," he called warmly, watching Maxen return his gaze, "you can sit in the front." Warren heard Maxen's quiet sigh before the latter nodded. "Thank you," came out a muffled appreciation before he marched and hitched inside the front passenger seat. Warren stood on the sidewalk while the window rolled up, and then they sped away. He kept his eyes on the speeding car, tilting his head to the side. "I think I know why Miss Cozy was a little upset." He nodded, grazing his chin as it was obvious. Luke and Maxen didn't get along, but both of them were her friends. "Oh, youth," he chuckled, completely forgetting his own circumstance. "Well, we can't help it. Our young miss is beautiful and captivating. That's why our dearest boss is being bombarded with marriage proposals for his daughter. I think even Mr. Quinn brought this up last night. Was he rooting for the second young master for our young miss?" Warren laughed, recalling how Conrad refused tons of marriage proposals from other families who were interested in his daughter. But his excitement was short-lived when a honk reminded him he didn't have a ride. His face instantly contorted. "Ayish," he huffed as he planted his hands on his hips. Knowing Conrad, he would surely let Warren take a taxi instead. "If not for friendship, I would have resigned long ago." Black residence. When Conrad, Cosette, and Luke hitched outside the car, Conrad and Cosette turned their attention to the person leaving the front passenger seat. Maxen bowed slightly before raising his eyes directly at Conrad. "I will be on my way, sir." Maxen kept his brave front under Conrad's gaze. "I only plan to walk her home safely." "Do you have any arrangements for today?" asked Conrad with his cool voice, but before Maxen could answer, Cosette chimed in. "Max, can you stay here? You said you don't have any more part-time today." Her request brought this deep frown on Luke, making him pray Maxen could read the air and leave them alone. He needed some time alone with Cosette. Maxen secretly clenched his teeth. "I need to." "Stay here for a while, Mr. Cloven. I actually need to talk to you regarding something," Conrad urged, which sounded more like a command. "That convenience store will stay close, until I say so." "Huh." Conrad didn't have much reaction as he faced Cosette. "Let's head inside, Cozy." His eyes then slid at Maxen once more and spoke in a commanding tone. "Mr. Cloven, come inside." "Ah, yes, sir." With that being said, Cosette smiled subtly as she linked her arms around Conrad. Maxen followed closely behind, tilting his head as it baffled him how her father knew about the convenience store. Meanwhile, as the three of them were walking on the step-up of the mansion, Luke darted his eyes and pointed at himself. What about me? He wondered. Feeling that Conrad was purposely ignoring him, and Cosette was very upset with him. Won't they ask me to come? Chapter 47, Conrad's Offer. Cozy, are you angry with me? Cosette kept her eyes on the pool with her arms crossed. After they entered the mansion, Conrad told her he would need to discuss something important with Maxen. Therefore, here she was in the pool area, sitting on one of the lounge chairs while Luke sat on the one beside her. He was sitting on the edge, facing her squarely. A frown was reigning over his face, as she had been silent and barely spoken a word with him. Cozy, he trailed off when she returned his gaze. Did I do something wrong? A quiet sigh escaped her mouth as she flung her legs out of the lounge chair to his side and faced him. Luke, I'm not angry with you. I'm just upset and a little worried, she confessed and let out another sigh. I know you want to be my friend and I appreciate you making time to hang out with me, but Maxen is my dearest friend. I'm not telling you to like him or befriend him, although that would be nice. Cosette huffed faintly as she looked him straight in the eye. All I'm saying is, if you want to be my friend, you have to be a little nicer or lenient towards my friends. I know you had nothing to do with Maxen and his life, but being a little kinder won't harm anyone. She clasped her hands on her lap, not taking her eyes off of him. I know you are a good person and absolutely sincere, but Maxen is very important to me. She was doing this for everyone's sake too. If Maxen turned into a villain, not only Mia and Asher would be in jeopardy, but also Luke. He would die for Pete's sake. But honestly, although that was Cosette's initial plan, her heart slightly changed. A huge part of her was still thinking about the original plot of the novel. However, another part of her was doing all this solely for Maxen. He was kind and considerate and sometimes warm. The more she spent time with Maxen, the more she realized Maxen wasn't as scary as to how he was portrayed in the novel. He wasn't a menace or as crazy or as unreasonable. Maxen was just like everybody else. He was just like everyone who had their hands outstretched, waiting for someone to take it and pull him up from falling into the abyss. He was just like anyone who needed mercy, warmth, and just someone who would be there for him. Hence, if Luke would only do damage to Maxen, even if she sincerely liked Luke, she wouldn't consider hanging out with the two of them present. That also meant she would spend less time with Luke if she must, since her priority was Maxen. Bias others may call it, but Cosette had already decided long ago, and she would keep her promise. I see, Luke rocked his head as he pursed his lips, seeing the 1,000 unspoken emotions gleaming in her eyes. He may be a little spoiled and hot-tempered, but Luke could read the sadness in her eyes. I'm sorry, Cozy, he whispered and frowned. I didn't mean to make you sad, it's just, you seem to like him when I'm courting you. You said you want to be my friend. I didn't know this is what you call courtship. I liked you. Cosette blinked, convinced Luke's feelings weren't that deep, and she was correct. He was someone who would go for something head-on with little plan, or didn't think much about it. Luke, if you're pursuing me, then my answer is a no. She denied him after a minute of silence, watching his frown grow deeper. Why is this because of that guy? She shook her head. My answer has nothing to do with Max. I don't plan on dating anyone, not now or in the future. She sighed and smacked her lips, not feeling anything in particular about this strange love confession that was one of the major highlights of any novel. Right now, all I can think of is enjoying my time in here. I'm still too young for romantic relationships. Cosette raised her head and smiled subtly. I want to focus on my life, the memories I create, my family and friends. Was that a bad thing? Luke remained silent, staring at her sweet smile while hearing his heart beat in his ear. Will you marry me? He blurted out, causing her to scrunch her nose up. Luke, are you even listening? She asked in dismay. It's just that I always get stunned whenever you smile like that. He laughed and scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. It's okay. The second rejection isn't as painful as the first one. He. Luke, her eyes fell soft before she chuckled in disbelief. He took her rejection quite well, as expected. But anyway, I know what I want now. Luke reclined with his palms on the lounge chair, eyes on her, lips stretched from ear to ear. What you want? She tilted her head to the side, thinking that was quick of him. Luke nodded and his closed lips stretched even broader. I don't want to see you frowning, especially because of me, and I will try until I succeed. The first one nearly moved her heart, but the next sabotaged it entirely. I don't give up on things once I set my mind to it. He grinned playfully, and I'm not losing to that guy. Maxen has a name. But he never even called my name even once. Because you keep calling him names. I introduced myself to him and he just ignored me. Have you forgotten? Your introduction is more like an intimidation, duh. Cozy, that's how men introduce themselves. Luke, just what sort of men are you hanging out with? While Cosette and Luke bickered in the pool area of the Black residence, Maxen and Conrad, in the latter's study room, were utterly silent. This wasn't the first time Maxen was in this room and sat on the same couch, and this was definitely not the first one he watched Conrad settle on the one-seater armchair after unbuttoning his blazer suit. Sir, but this was definitely the first time Maxen would break the silence between them. I know you're a busy man, so I won't beat around the bush. How do you know where I work? Conrad leaned back comfortably, raising his leg to rest over the other. I knew all the places you worked, Mr. Cloven. What? I didn't plan on telling you since you might think I am invading your private life. However, after my daughter introduced you to me, I had to do my own digging. A frown instantly resurfaced on Maxen's face at Conrad's explanation. How could Conrad do a background check on him? It was not like he didn't have the power, and not that Maxen couldn't understand his worries. However, just the thought of someone knowing his entire life left a bitter taste in Maxen's mouth. He didn't like the idea. A quiet sigh slipped past Conrad's lips. This is why I didn't plan on telling you, since no one likes someone else taking a peek in their life, he admitted in a low tone, tapping his fingertips on the armrest. My apologies. Sir, didn't you say what I did in the past or my status doesn't matter to you? Asked Maxen as he lowered his eyes, a little betrayed as it seemed Conrad didn't dwell in his history back then, because he already planned on doing a background check on him. And I still stand on that. Conrad waited for the young man to raise his head before he continued. Mr. Cloven, I still don't care about which family you came from or how tragic your life had been. I am a man who doesn't dwell in the past, but in the future, not even in the present. Well, now that changed a little since I liked my life in the present. His eyes fell soft as a subtle smile appeared on his face. The only reason I did a background check is that Cosette had been thinking of applying for a part-time job. Huh? Conrad nodded. My daughter used to help in our company, but she didn't ask to have any position in the company. Instead, she wanted to apply for a cashier position at a convenience store. When I asked her why, she told me you were working multiple part-times. He paused as his expression gradually turned somber, with eyes growing sharper by the second. Mr. Cloven, having one part-time for a student is already illegal, but multiple ones for your age. I was concerned, he expressed, thinking about all the details from Maxen's profile. It was a lie that Conrad didn't care, he does, especially after reading Maxen's biography. That's why I asked you to come with me since I had an offer to give you, he added, not beating around the bush, eyes on Maxen. I am risking a lawsuit here, but work for me. Chapter 48, The Reason Pride Was a Sin. I am risking a lawsuit here, but work for me. Maxen's brows creased as he repeated what he just heard in his head. For a moment, he doubted his ears, but staring at Conrad's solemn front, he figured he couldn't mistake Conrad's offer for other things. It was very clear. Sir, what do you mean by that? He stuttered. I cannot employ you legally, so you will work under the table. Conrad explained, still tapping his index on the armrest mildly. I want to hire you as Cosette's tutor. Maxen's brows twitched. Didn't you say you ran a background check on me? He blurted out, biting his tongue while studying Conrad's expression to see if he was offended. The latter's countenance didn't change even the slightest. I barely passed my classes, and between Cosette and me, she is more qualified to tutor me, he added as his voice lowered. I know that, however, keep in mind the days you were absent from school can only sum up over 2 months combined for the entire school year, and yet, you never had to repeat a year. Others were cramming just to pass the year, but you barely made an effort. But of course, these are all calculated arguments. Conrad shrugged nonchalantly, as he had thought about Maxen's argument beforehand and knew how to counter them all, but he didn't want to manipulate Maxen and make him agree. Mr. Cloven, I'm not hiring you as a tutor for academic purposes. This time, Conrad leaned forward until his elbows were on his thighs, eyes at Maxen. I want you to teach her about life. Pardon. As I've said before, Cozy was a brilliant young lady. In terms of academics, she can ace everything without a problem. However, with the lifestyle she chose to live now, she's like a newborn. Everything to her is new. That school you are both attending, the bus rides, and almost everything, Conrad explained solemnly. I need someone who had lived the same lifestyle to show her the path without unknowingly stepping onto a dangerous route. Maxen remained quiet for a moment while exchanging gazes with Conrad. Is that another calculated excuse, sir? Yes, Conrad nodded, knowing this was too shallow for a reason to hire Maxen. All reasonings I will tell you are excuses to hide my real agenda, Mr. Cloven. Conrad slowly straightened his back. If you agreed, you will gain tons of benefits. I will give you a safer shelter, money to sustain your schooling, and a comfortable life without working multiple part-time jobs, and give you opportunities. I would have asked to adopt you, but I believe you do not want my daughter to be your sister, do you? Maxen bit his inner lip as he secretly balled his hands into a fist. No, he whispered, lowering his eyes. Just the idea of being Cosette's adoptive brother turned Maxen's stomach. He already liked her, and Maxen had already accepted she was just a beautiful dream. Being her brother would seal this already impossible dream. That's why I am hiring you as her tutor, or maybe a babysitter is the correct term for it. Conrad rocked his head while studying Maxen's demure. The job is simple. Just make sure she's safe and she will pass her class since she confessed she was skipping classes. She's skipping classes because of me, Maxen blurted out under his breath before he raised his head. I was a delinquent. She won't be safe with me. I don't think I am up for the job, sir. No, you are more than qualified. Maxen's brows furrowed when Conrad smiled subtly. The other day, Cosette told me she would become a delinquent, although not now, but she said she might be. And that's fine with you. Conrad laughed briefly in amusement. Cosette had learned self-defense at a young age. In a brawl, you will not win against her, Mr. Cloven, and this is not coming from the confidence of a father. I just know her. His eyes fell soft as a quiet sigh slipped past his lips. I already expected that you will still refuse, regardless of the dividends. But please think this through. I'm not in a rush to get an answer, and neither I'm the type who takes no as an answer, he added. You heard my offer, and I will wait until you make up your mind, Mr. Cloven. Maxen quietly sighed, keeping his silence for an entire minute. Since their discussion seemed to have ended, he breathed out sharply. I will think about it, sir, he answered while Conrad nodded in satisfaction. Then will you stay for dinner? Maxen shook his head mildly. No, sir, I only want to walk her home, but thank you for the offer. All right, I won't force you. Conrad rocked his head once again as he lifted his hand towards the door, but I will insist on letting my driver drive you home. Maxen's mouth opened and closed, ready to refuse him. However, he figured Conrad would take no as an answer. Well, Maxen walked his daughter home to make sure she was safe even with Luke's company, so it was only proper for Conrad to make sure he would also return home safely. All right, he agreed in the end, pushing himself out of the couch. Maxen marched towards the door slowly but halted when he was by the door. He looked back about the convenience store. I bought it, that construction is already on my to-buy list too, Conrad answered with a straight face. Maxen wasn't even surprised anymore since he guessed that much. He simply needed confirmation. So Maxen resumed leaving the study room, hand on the doorknob before he paused once again. Why do you want to help me, sir? He asked because for him, that was what Conrad was doing. The latter was simply using all sorts of excuses because he knew he might graze Maxen's pride and ego. When he looked back, Conrad already stood up from his seat and was standing near the stand where he was pouring himself a glass of wine. I'm not Mr. Cloven, Conrad replied without casting him a look. I told you, everything I do is for my daughter. He slowly picked up the wineglass and turned to face Maxen. As I've said, I'm a man who always thinks of the future and considers every possibility. My point here is, although I do not care about your status in life, life isn't a fairy tale and it will take a lot of sacrifices to make our world bearable to live in, he explained as he peeled his eyes away from Maxen and walked towards the window. You can call this help if things didn't go the way I see them, but if they did. He cocked his head back and his eyes instantly fell on Maxen. I won't allow my daughter to be with someone who couldn't provide the things I can give her and the life she deserved. Because at the end of the day, love wasn't enough to feed his daughter. Love could make her happy, but once problems arose, which always happen, it would slowly take away her smile. Conrad was certain Cosette wouldn't have a problem financially. He secured her future already, but he didn't want her to be with an insecure man. That would ruin the two of them. You know that well, do you, Mr. Cloven? He added, rendering Maxen speechless. Maxen couldn't even speak a word after that as he simply bowed his head as a farewell, but before he could close the door, Conrad spoke once again. Mr. Cloven, pride is not entirely a poor trait. It has its significant benefits. However, sometimes, pride can do us more damage. Sometimes, because of it, we missed opportunities and we find ourselves in a stagnant life with no improvement, leaving us with only regrets. I sincerely hope you think about my offer. Maxen pursed his lips and tilted his head down. I will, sir. With that being said, Maxen finally left and Conrad didn't stop him. The latter stayed in his spot, eyes on the shut door for an entire minute before it opened once again, revealing his executive assistant, Warren. Warren had this already intrigued expression plastered on his face while he was pointing over his shoulder and closing the door. Boss, did you scold the boy? He asked without beating around the bush as Maxen ignored him, as if he was in a trance or deep in thought. Conrad pressed his lips into a thin line before he faced the window once again, swirling the wine in his hand until the red liquid coated the transparent glass. Warren, Conrad raised the glass to his lips, sniffing the wine's aroma. Sometimes, I wonder what would happen to me and my daughter if she didn't open up to me. His assistant's brows creased as he scratched his temple. The same. I mean our future. Conrad gazed down at the wine and stared at his distorted reflection. We would have lost each other, and that is all because of pride. That's what I think would happen, or rather, that is what she, Cozy, taught me. Chapter 49, Devilsin. Pride is not entirely a bad trait. Sometimes it will do us more damage. Conrad's words repeated in Maxen's head like a broken record. Before he knew it, his feet were standing by the door where the pool was at. Stopping in his tracks, he raised his head only to catch Cosette and Luke laughing in the lounge chairs. You know that well, do you, Mr. Cloven? Once again, Conrad's voice rang in his head, making him ball his hand into a tight fist. From this vantage point, watching Cosette and Luke made him realize what he already thought previously: the two of them suit each other. Both of them were around the same age, they were good-looking. And they had chemistry. Not just that, but they wouldn't have a problem if they liked each other, since both of them were well-born. But still, this left a bitter taste in his mouth. Why would the two of them be a good match while he wasn't? Luke was annoying and pushy, and a spoiled young master. I hate myself, Maxen thought, loosening his grip. Do I have the right to get angry? He doesn't have even the slightest right to feel this pain in his heart, was what he believed. Cosette and he were friends. She could choose any man she likes and whoever she wanted to be friends with. He couldn't hog her all to himself just because he was afraid she would abandon him. He was right, he mentally nodded. I have a long way to go. Feelings alone weren't enough. It might be a bitter pill to swallow, but Conrad was right. Her father already knew where his budding feeling was going even before Maxen could realize it. Jealousy would eat him, alive. After all, love was an unstoppable force and no one could stop it. You should think this through, Max. Don't get swayed just yet. He gritted his teeth while keeping his eyes on her, his face relaxed seeing her smiling and laughing. Will she think I was taking advantage of her? A quiet sigh slipped past his lips before he turned around to leave. Aside from his pride, there was one thing that was stopping Maxen from agreeing with Conrad's offer. That was, what would Cosette think of him? Would she think Maxen took advantage of her and her father's kindness? Would she feel betrayed, used, disgusted? There were endless negative thoughts that were hovering over his head, and they only grew even more negative. He couldn't blame himself, since that was how it had always been. Maxen was used to doing things on his own without anyone's help. So accepting Conrad's charity work was him lowering his pride and opening his heart to vulnerability. But no one would think of that, right? They would only see the fact that a nobody like him befriended an heiress and got into the good graces of her father. That story would sound more believable to others. And Maxen already knew where that story would go. It's always been like that, he whispered. What's taking them so long? Cosette let out a deep exhale as she reclined, hands on either side of her. It's about dinner. I wonder what Papa talks about with Maxen. I bet he told him to stay away with you. Luke shrugged when Cosette glared at him. I mean, he obviously likes you. You don't know Maxen. Hey, I'm a man, all right. Luke rolled his eyes as he leaned forward and then pointed a finger at her. Even if he says he will not like you, he will eventually do. Do you know why? Because I'm beautiful. Exactly. Cosette's frown grew uglier as she gazed at him with judgy eyes. Luke, do you think appearance is the only important factor for people? Of course not, money too. Luke scrunched his nose up. You have the looks, money, and status. If I were him, I will seduce you and secure my future. You're like a walking ticket from his hellish life, you know. You talk so cruelly, Luke. I'm talking honestly. Cozy, do you think that guy is hanging out with you without an ulterior motive? If only I know he is probably working behind your back. He shook his head as Cosette was surprisingly unsuspecting towards Maxen. Cozy, had it ever crossed you that his cold demure towards you is his tactic to hook you? Huh. Men are like that, goodness. Luke clicked his tongue a few times whilst shaking his head mildly. They will pull out the hard-to-get card or will disappear for a while until their prey looks for them. I think that's what he is doing to keep you wrapped around his fingers. That bastard. So what? Cosette sighed while Luke looked at her in dismay. So what if he sees me as his ticket to a good life? Cozy, what the? At least Maxen had to live a good life. I don't see any problem with that if he had such an ambition. If anything, I will just give him everything if that is what he needs. Wow, Cozy, do you like him? Luke sprung up to his feet, making her look up at him. No, you can't. I like Maxen. No. Luke, don't be so dramatic. Her frown deepened as she let out another sigh. I like Maxen, but not romantically, okay? Really? He asked, and she nodded. Then why do you sound like a hopeless romantic? Are you cheating on me? Her face contorted but ignored his last question. Max is a dear friend to me. She lowered her eyes and smiled subtly. Helping him the best I can is what friends do, isn't it? She raised her head once again. I will do the same to you if you need my help. His breath hitched before he calmed down. Really? Really? Cosette nodded because that was true. If you need someone not as a wife or a girlfriend, I will certainly be there for you. Cozy, do you really have to spell out that wife and girlfriend role? You're good at twisting people's words. He giggled mischievously before she turned her head to the entrance of the pool. Cozy, called Conrad, making her face brighten up as she immediately sprung up. Cosette skipped her steps while Luke followed closely behind. Papa, how's your talk with Max? She asked as soon as she stood in front of her father, tilting her upper body to the side to search for Maxen. Where is he? He left. He left already, she frowned, setting her eyes back to him, only to see Conrad nodding. He didn't even say goodbye. Cozy, you have to understand your friend's schedule is different from yours. Conrad patted her head gently. Let's head inside. Dinner is served. Cosette forced a smile as she nodded. All right. Can I stay for dinner? Conrad shifted his eyes at Luke when the latter raised a hand. Sure. Nice. With that being said, the three of them head to the dining hall, where they enjoyed a lavish dinner. As usual, Conrad barely spoke while Luke acted like he was the host of the dinner. Cosette wasn't particularly sad, and she indulged with Luke, but it was obvious she was worried about Maxen. Conrad, who noticed this, didn't voice it out though. He simply pretended he didn't notice since he understood Maxen needed time, and they should respect that. Once the dinner ended, Cosette had to send Luke off. It would be a lie if she said she didn't enjoy Luke's company. She did. However, it bothered her that Maxen left without saying goodbye to her. Was he avoiding me? She wondered, sitting on the pink chair in front of the desk in her room. She had already finished freshening up and was ready for bed, but following her routine, Cosette had to write in her daily journal. But because her head had been drifting elsewhere, she hadn't written a word yet. Cosette simply played with the pen with her fingers, deep in thought. As she was thinking about Maxen, Luke's word back in the pool crossed her head. Her eyes softened. That's the problem, she mumbled. I wish Max had an ulterior motive. It will be easier that way since that means he has an option of not becoming a Devilsin. The main villain who appeared in Volume 2 of the novel The Devil's Den was named Maxen Devilsin. Handsome, powerful, and wicked. Looking at Maxen now, he was struggling with life as if there was no way he would ever step foot in the upper echelon. However, there would be a turning point in his life when Maxen was abducted to meet his father, eventually changing his surname from Cloven, his mother's surname, to Devilsin. In the novel, it was called A Young Boy Selling His Soul to the Devil since Maxen had become villainous. Devilsin, she whispered and bit her lower lip, tapping the end of the pen against the open journal. The family who leads an underground organization. I'm scared. Chapter 50, Their fates were twisting, and no one even notices. Maxen's family background was one hell of a complicated maze. It was crazy. He might have gotten out of working multiple jobs and gained wealth he never thought he would ever have. However, he was never happy with how his life turned out. If anything, it only got worse. He soiled his hand with blood, put his life in danger every single day, and sacrificed his morals and beliefs and regard for human life. What for money, power? Maxen had always known he would never regret that decision because, for him, he got nothing to lose. The world messed with him unprovoked, so he would mess with it until someone would put a hole in his head. Of course, he regretted it in the end. When Mia came into his life, there was a point his guilt was killing him from the inside, for letting the world turn him into what it wanted him to become, and for doing despicable deeds to the female lead. He had many regrets, thousands of them. And yet, when he met his karma, he was smiling, not happily but peacefully. He died with a smile as if he was finally free, and that only meant Maxen joined the underground organization for solely one reason: to die. Cosette's eyes strung as she wiped the tears that were tempting to fall from her eyes. After writing a summary of what happened for the day, she ended up writing part of the novel in her own words. It had been a while since she recounted the details of the novel, so she was a little more emotional the more she thought about it. "It's really unfair," came out a muffled voice, letting go of her pen to wipe her eyes. Unlike the sadness she felt before, her tears this time were more. She couldn't stop them. Before, she felt bad and sad for Maxen because he was her favorite character. She understood him. She doesn't condemn what he did in the novel since she had always believed his end was something he deserved. But after meeting him and getting to know him in person, recounting the details of the novel hit her differently. He didn't deserve a fate like that for sure. "I hate the author." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath to calm herself down. No, it's not her fault. She's just writing their story and barely has power over the course of their action, or what the author explained to them, to the readers. Even so, her determination shot through the roof. When Cosette opened her eyes, a blazing fire was beneath them. Although she had been trying, she had to step up to her game. "That's right," she slammed her palms on the desk, nodding. "If I don't work on it, Maxen might join that organization, and I will not see him for many years. I can't let that happen." She nodded and repeated what she just said in her head. "You can do it, self." She cheered with her fist up before she went silent, thinking of a meticulous plan to stop the inevitable. Meanwhile, Maxen was lying down on his thin and old bed on the floor. He was using his arm as his head cushion, tossing and catching a small ball as he waited for sleep to strike him. He shut one of his eyes when he zoned out for a moment, failing to catch the small ball which landed on his left eye. "TSS," he clicked his tongue but didn't pick up the ball. Instead, he kept his gaze on the mold on the ceiling. The place was already old, and the mold was from the leak every time the weather was bad. Whenever it was raining, Maxen usually had to keep everything in this small room in one place because it was leaking everywhere. He would also have to sleep sitting up, or don't sleep at all. He had never pitied himself before because he had already accepted his tough life. That was what he had to endure, living independently. But now, he couldn't help but think about it after Conrad's offer. "A charity, he mumbled, thinking that was all it was about. Cosette's father pitied him just like how she pitied him, hence he wanted to help. "Pity," he whispered. I hate her." Maxen covered his eyes with his arm, grumbling in irritation. Of course, he didn't hate Cosette, but he hated she was this kind. If only she wasn't, then he wouldn't be in a dilemma. But then again, she didn't ask me to like her. He peeked into one of his eyes and sighed quietly. "It's me who fell for her." It was not like Cosette was treating him differently. She was kind to him, but also to everyone else. No matter how annoying Luke was, she would smile at him and understand him. She was like that to their classmate as well, the reason everyone just wanted to be friends with her. She was like a magnet, and everyone was attracted to her, boys and girls alike. "It's annoying," he grumbled with an ugly frown, turning to his side, facing the wall. His eyes were filled with bitterness as he clicked his tongue once again. How can you get annoyed at everyone who gets close to her? He asked himself because this was the only time he could be honest and address his own issues. At first, it was all right with him since he had always wished for Cosette to leave him alone. But the longer she stuck with him like a gum, like a shadow who would always be there following him in silence, he started to like and get used to her presence. Now he found everyone who would get chummy with her annoying. Luke was at the top of his list. They might look good together, but he's a brat. He sighed and smacked his lips. "She's messing with my head. Her father isn't helping either. What a pair." Maxen shut his eyes to force himself to sleep, but minutes had gone by and he couldn't fall asleep. He reopened his eyes and tossed to the other side. As soon as he did, his eyes landed on the phone right beside his pillow. His eyes grew softer. During this time, Cosette would call or bombard his inbox with either messages or voice messages, but his phone hadn't rung even once. Did she have fun with him? He wondered, and his expression turned sour. "Shit, Max." He ruffled his hair in irritation as he ground his teeth at the feeling that was creeping up into his heart. It wasn't healthy anymore. This growing feeling towards her was developing so dangerously fast. It came from being satisfied with just being her friend to getting all worked up at the thought of another person. Well, it was because Cosette mostly had girlfriends. So Luke's appearance was something that was new and broke Cosette's and Maxen's routine. Hence, he didn't know what to do with this sudden appearance of an annoying brat. Ding! His thoughts were suspended as he hurriedly checked his phone. His sour expression relaxed just seeing her name on the broken screen. "I'm like a creep," he whispered, checking his phone to see her message. His lips curled up into a subtle smile upon seeing her terse message. He could still hear her voice as he read. "You didn't say goodbye, Max. I will ignore you because I thought you will stay for dinner. But good night. Reply and you will get ignored. Angry emote." I never replied, though. He chuckled and shook his head, reading her message once more. Just when he was about to put his phone down, he halted and read her message once again. The side of his lips curled up mischievously before he typed. "I was in a hurry." Maxen pressed send even before he could change his mind. He stared at his phone and chuckled when it was immediately read, imagining her expression. In their message log, Cosette would flood their message while his reply could be counted with his fingers. Meaning his replies were rare. He wasn't doing that on purpose, though. He simply didn't know how to respond. "She's typing." He laughed when she stopped typing and then typed once again. In the end, Cosette replied with a furious emoji with a message. "Did you reply because I told you I will ignore you?" He shook his head after a good laugh and instead sent her a reply, "Good night." QINN's residence. Asher stopped by the entrance of the kitchen when he saw Luke rummaging through the kitchen drawers. He watched his brother turn the kitchen upside down while looking for something. "How's your day?" he asked, walking up to the counter and leaning his arms against it. "Foods are not there, it's in the fridge." Luke paused from rummaging through the drawers as he turned his head in his brother's direction. "I'm not dumb not to know where the food is. I'm not hungry, I had dinner with Cozy." "Then what are you looking for?" Asher asked, as this was so out of his brother's character. Luke was the type who would rely everything on their servants. His brows rose when a smug grin turned up on Luke's face. "What's with that look?" Asher narrowed his eyes suspiciously, while Luke jumped and leaned his arm from across the counter. "Brother, I talked to Dad, and he gave me a thumbs up when I said I want to pursue Cozy." Luke grinned from ear to ear until his teeth were showing. He laughed evilly, patting Asher's shoulder lightly. "I might get married before you, but it's fine. You will soon find someone you like. Wahaha." Asher's face contorted as his brother modulated his voice, just now to sound like a wise old man. He shook his head lightly before he pushed himself away from the counter. He sauntered towards the fridge. By the way, the exams are approaching, and Asher halted as he gazed back at Luke when the latter snickered. "Brother, don't worry about that." Luke grinned evilly, hands on his hips. "This young master doesn't have to bother with that since I just transferred schools." It took a moment for Asher to register his brother's words before his eyes dilated. "What?" Chapter 51, New Classmate. "What?" Shock reigned over Asher's face as he stared at his brother's smug and proud grin. He knew Luke often decided on impulse, but no matter how his little brother loathed the academy, he stayed because that was the best academy in the country. Just graduating from it alone would open countless opportunities for anyone. "You will transfer school?" Asher asked, and his brother nodded as an answer. "To the school where that young miss of the Black family is attending." Luke kept on nodding. "Correct," he grinned, arms crossed. "I will show her my sincerity, brother." Later. Asher could only stare at that arrogance plastered on his brother's face, which Luke brought until the next day. And just like the shock on Asher's face, Cosette's and Maxen's jaw nearly hit their desk as they also stared at that smug grin in front of the classroom. "Hello, peasants. This young master here is your new classmate, and I transferred here all in the name of love." Luke introduced himself arrogantly, chin up. "May we all get along well, ha ha ha." There was a long silence that fell in the room, and only Luke's devious laughter echoed. Cosette, who didn't expect this, couldn't even think because of the shock. She flinched when the girl's squeals exploded in the room. "Kaya Tilda, you're so handsome." "Oh my god, are you a celebrity?" "Omo, I think I've seen him somewhere." "Really, we have a classmate that is a celebrity." Cosette's face contorted as she looked around her classmate. Luke just called them peasants, and they were squealing like this. Was this some sort of fetish or what? Everyone, girls mostly, accepted Luke easily and had shown interest in him just from his looks. Boys, on the other hand, seemed to be neutral about it. They didn't seem to dislike or like him. They looked like they were more annoyed by the girls' cries. Meanwhile, as the commotion ensued, Maxen's frown deepened. He glanced at Luke, who was acting like a celebrity beside their homeroom teacher. I didn't expect this, he thought, thinking yesterday was the only time he would have to put up with Luke. But that guy transferred to their school and now he had to see him every day. Were all rich kids as crazy as to shift school in the middle of the school year? He pinched the space between his brows at the headache he had been enduring since last night. Whatever. All right, class, settle down now, continue this later. Their homeroom teacher raised her voice before facing Luke. Mr. Quinn, please take the vacant seat. Thank you, Luke smiled and glanced at the additional seat meant for him across the room. A deep exhale slipped past his lips as he marched towards Cosette instead of his seat. He smiled at Cosette as he stood beside her desk before setting his eyes on the person sitting next to her. Can I take this seat instead? He beamed Faye a charming smile and spoke gently. I think I can see the board better in here. Faye, who was sitting on Cosette's side, could only gaze at Luke in a daze. In her eyes, no, in everyone's eyes, Luke looked super handsome as if he was a celebrity. Anyone would be mesmerized, especially if he was smiling like an angel. May I? Luke snapped her back with his question, making Faye nod on instinct. Yes, Faye stuttered before she elbowed Amy to bring her back from her trance. Girl, move. Ah, Amy cleared her throat and asked her seatmate to move as well. Fortunately, everyone had been getting along well since they had been eating lunch together recently. Therefore, everyone adjusted for Luke so he could sit on Faye's spot. Seeing this, Cosette's under eye twitched. Even Maxen was flabbergasted at how kind everyone was. But then again, they never bothered him like the other section. When Luke already settled on the seat, the class had started as their teacher already told them to open their textbook to a particular page. Some of their classmates were still distracted by the fresh blood in their section as they kept looking in his direction. Hello, Luke ignored the attention as he faced Cosette with a smile. He cupped his jaw and fixed his eyes on her, giggling at the lingering shock in her eyes. Luke, Cosette lowered her head and whispered to avoid disturbing their teacher. What are you doing here? Cozy isn't obvious, I transferred. She cleared her throat and breathed out. I mean, why? I just said it during my introduction. Weren't you listening? He cocked his head to the side. I did it in the name of love. She cringed as she looked at his almost innocent expression. She should have seen this coming, she thought. Luke was the person who would decide on impulse. How could she think visiting her in their house the very next day they first met was the most extreme he could do? Don't you want me to be your classmate? He frowned after a minute. No, it's not like that. Cosette sighed once again and shook her head mildly. It's just, I was very surprised. I didn't think you will transfer school in this fast at that. I'm a Quinn. That's the point. Her voice was incredibly low as she leaned closer to him so he could hear her. Are you sure about this decision? 100%. Luke batted his eyes ever so slowly. Don't worry, my dad supports me here. That's why I got approved overnight. Cosette studied his confidence before she nodded. Well, if that makes you happy. Of course. I feel like this is the best decision I did all my life. The feeling is even more satisfying than when I received my dream motorbike. Luke grinned confidently, bringing reassurance to her heart that he would be fine with this. All right, she sighed for the umpteenth time and then smiled meekly at him. Listen now, don't be distracted. Just as Cosette was about to focus on the subject, Luke held her arm. Her brows rose, seeing the puppy eyes plastered on his face. I don't have a textbook, he confessed, batting his eyes to gain sympathy. Can we share? You transferred overnight, and you didn't have a textbook. It was so abrupt. Cosette was doubtful as she narrowed her eyes. Who would believe him? The Quinns were influential, and getting him a textbook overnight was a piece of cake. But looking at his empty-looking bag, Cosette was certain he probably only brought a pen and a notebook with him. What am I going to do with you? She sighed as she nodded. Sure, let's share then. Nice, Luke grinned happily as he discreetly moved his seat closer to her. Seeing his enthusiasm, Cosette smiled subtly as his energy was contagious. Meanwhile, Maxen, who would usually not listen in the class or pay attention to her during the class, couldn't help but glance at her from time to time. His frown deepened when she shared her textbook with Luke. Don't she realize it? He wondered, glancing at Luke for a moment. He purposely didn't bring anything for something like this. Maxen's jaw tightened as he clenched his teeth before he looked to the other side. He kept his eyes on the window, propping his jaw with his knuckles. However, even when he was facing the window, their faint reflections soon appeared, and he could still see Luke getting chummy with Cosette. This is very annoying, he thought, closing his eyes so he wouldn't see anything. He already closed his eyes so he wouldn't see their reflection. However, he could still hear them. Even though Cosette and Luc were keeping their voice down, he could still hear them as if they were just whispering right in front of him. This is awful. He pinched the space between his brows to soothe his headache. Maxen had to endure Luc bothering Cosette from time to time, and Cosette entertaining his every whim until lunch break arrived. He thought he could finally sigh in relief and get a breather on the rooftop. However, it had become a routine that once the bell rang, half of the class would move their desk and gather in the middle. So before Maxen could stand and leave, his classmates already moved their desks and moved his as well. Before he knew it, they had already formed a huge table, and everyone was already sitting around and near her desk. Maxen was left seated on his chair while his desk was moved next to Cosette's. What am I doing? He wondered as he only watched everything unfold, doing nothing. His eyes gazed at everyone, and as expected, most of them were interested in Luc, as the latter brought a lunch box with him. You're bringing a lunch box? Cosette asked in surprise while Luc smirked. Of course, Luc looked at everyone before setting them back on her. You told me about the lunch breaks, so I brought a lunch box for you. In a blink of an eye, the lunch box in front of her was replaced with a more delicate-looking lunch box. When she raised her gaze, Luc was already holding hers. From now on, I will bring you lunch, so yours will be mine. Luc, Cosette gasped before she flinched when she realized everyone's gaze. Sister Cozy, called Sarah as she darted her eyes between the two. Are you too? Luc grinned proudly and pointed to himself with his thumb. I am her suitor. Anyone who likes Cozy will be my rival. Like Cosette. Chapter 52, something she only hoped, but had always considered the worst. I am her suitor. Anyone who likes Cozy will be my rival. There was a long silence that enveloped the entire classroom after Luc's declaration. Cosette was mortified as she looked at him blankly and with wide eyes. He had lost his mind. But the reaction from the crowd was different from what she expected. Although they were initially shocked, darting their eyes between the two of them, they looked perfect. Cosette was the uncrowned muse in their class. Even the school bell could not compare to the tip of her hair. Since she was beautiful, there was no need for debate about who could be her escort. Maxen was an eyesore, but no one could tell her that. But it had been a silent agreement that there was no need for an escort since no one deserved the title. Now Luc suited the position. He was charming, and even when he was arrogant, there was just something in him that was so appealing. Maybe it was his angelic smile, his bright mood, or just his carefree aura. Whatever it was, one fact remained. Luc and Cosette would be a good pair. So I don't have a rival. That's good. Waha. Luc laughed loudly and planted his hand on his hip. Everyone seemed to have given up their fantasy about Cosette. Just as he expected, it was better to keep a close watch on those who were eyeing his future fiancé. As Luc's laughter resonated across the classroom, Cosette flinched when something slid in front of her. She raised her brows and gazed to her left. I'm not hungry, Maxen explained in his usual indifferent tone as he offered his lunchbox, which Cosette brought for him. But I brought it for you. I'm not hungry, he repeated, knowing Cosette preferred eating the lunchbox she made so she could improve her cooking. As a person who had eaten the first lunchbox she prepared, he could tell her skills had improved significantly. But Cosette still wanted to improve, and she also enjoyed eating what she was feeding her father and friend. Cosette frowned and grabbed his arm when he picked up his bag. She knew him, and she definitely knew Maxen would leave. It's fine, she reassured, sliding the lunchbox in front of him. Even if you're not hungry, you need to eat. What the just then, Cosette flinched while Maxen's expression grew sour when they heard Luc's voice once again. Hey you, Cozy is being kind here, but you kept taking her efforts for granted. Never mind though, this young master will eat. Luc couldn't even finish his sentence when Maxen placed his hand on top of the lunch box. Not the one Cosette made for him, but the one Luc brought for her. The latter kept his eyes on Luc and made sure that the arrogant brat would see how he would eat the lunch he brought for her. Let's switch, Maxen snapped his eyes and looked at Cosette. I haven't eaten anything this luxurious. Oh, Cosette blinked as she now had Maxen's lunchbox, and then in front of him was the one Luc brought for her. Hey, Luc pointed at Maxen in disbelief. That is for her. How dare you snatch it away from her, you opportunist. She has a sensitive taste bud, and yes, I'm shameless and an opportunist. So what, aren't you the generous young master? Maxen shrugged nonchalantly as he opened the lunchbox. The food inside was well put, as if a professional chef prepared them. However, no matter how pretty it appeared, it didn't make his mouth water. If anything, he lost his appetite. That corny smiling face decoration on the lunchbox she made was 100 times better than this. But well, he was petty, something Maxen never thought he had in him. You, Luke's face turned red in anger as Maxen frowned the second he saw the food. Not only did he snatch the lunch for Cosette, but he had the audacity to make face. How ungrateful. Cosette, who was a little baffled at how things were unfolding, shook her head mildly. She looked around and their classmates were eating while watching the two banter. It was as if they were watching a telenovela with how invested they looked. Gosh, she sighed before she tugged Luke's hand, waiting for him to look down at her. I am a little sensitive and anything can trigger my allergy. That's why I bring my own lunch. Cosette smiled kindly, extending her patience so they could eat in peace. For goodness sake, the lunch break was only an hour and they had wasted a lot of time. It was not like she was lying, but she has already gotten used to eating what she cooked. Moreover, eating what Luke brought for her would eventually become a routine. I feel like I am having a taste of my own medicine. The corner of her lips twitched at the thought but still maintained her smile. Luke, let's eat since we only have 1 hour break. Luke glared daggers at Maxen before he plopped his butt down on the chair. He should be thankful he is Cozy's friend, or I had already. He coughed when he felt death staring at him from the side. He glanced to his left and saw Cosette smiling at him. Luke, let's eat, shall we? She smiled as if she didn't just give Luke a death stare just now. Sure, Luke huffed to calm himself down. He then proceeded to open the lunchbox he snatched from Cosette and frowned. It looked childish and corny, but he knew Cosette was making her own lunchbox, so he kept his thoughts to himself. However, when Luke finally took a bite, his face instantly went blank. He tried to chew it, but eventually throw it up, catching everyone's attention. Luke, are you all right? She asked in a panic as he coughed. Cozy, what the hell is this poison? He gasped, making her flinch in surprise. Is it bad? She inquired, and seeing how he scrunched his nose up, she frowned. Really? Cosette pursed her lips and took the spoon to eat from her own lunchbox. Both lunchboxes were prepared and cooked the same, so she would know. However, she tasted nothing bad from it, which made her brows furrowed as she looked back at Luke. Hey, don't eat it. Luke panicked while she was chewing, but Cosette looked fine as she swallowed it down. Before she could talk and taste the food from his lunchbox, Maxen spoke. If your expensive taste buds can't eat home-cooked, just switch with mine. Don't waste food. Maxen cast him a side-eye as he hadn't touched the food yet. You. Luke, I think you should switch with Maxen. Cosette backed Maxen up as that only made sense. Luke was someone who only ate first class. Something this simple wasn't enough for his taste buds. Max barely touched the floor actually. I don't think he had eaten yet. Just switch with him since it will be troublesome if you forced yourself. She flinched when Luke replied with a loud, no. Luke. I will eat it, Luke grumbled and clicked his tongue in irritation, glaring at Maxen. His expression grew even bitter when Maxen shrugged nonchalantly. Cozy made this so I will eat it without leaving a crumb, he announced and shoved a spoonful inside his mouth. Everyone watched Luke's expression change with every passing second and with every chew. Fortunately, he was bringing a bottle of water and drank it from time to time. The power of love, whispered Amy to Faye as she watched the three eat in silence. I didn't know Maxen had been eating poison every single day. Poor Luke, Faye shook her head as she felt sorry for Luke. His rival had accepted the challenge. I don't think Sister Cozy was aware though. Sarah also whispered, and their murmuring soon travelled around, keeping it low so it wouldn't make the already awkward atmosphere more awkward. Despite this futile attempt, it still reached Cosette's ears, nearly making her choke on her own food. Just what sort of drama did I get myself into? She wondered as she looked down to hide the horror plastered on her face. I don't recall this happening in the novel, but then again, this is 10 years prior to the start of the novel. Still, Luke didn't switch schools. The more she thought about it, and with the pressure on her with the current situation, it heightened her fear. I think I'm not just changing Volume 2 now. Her eyes dilated in horror, knowing Luke was already part of Volume 1 of the novel while Maxen was in Volume 2. Wasn't her plan for the novel to end in Volume 1? Because Maxen would only appear in the novel in Volume 2, and that would change everything. But with Luke's entanglement in her business, and it seemed this was only the tip of the iceberg, there was this sense of dread creeping into her heart. It scared her, but in another sense, deep in her heart, she only hoped nothing major would change in the novel with her interference. But she had already thought about this possibility, and she still went for it, because at the end of the day, the novel could be a wholesome one with only life lessons, without going for the bloody path. Chapter 53, Abduction. Everyone in Section F couldn't focus in class, as the trio Maxen, Cosette and Luc were far more interesting to watch. Although they were discreet, Cosette wasn't brain-dead not to notice these watchful eyes. Still, she kept her sentiments all to herself and tried to focus on the class. A shallow breath slipped past her lips as she was writing in her notebook. However, her writing speed gradually slowed down as she had been very distracted after lunch. Cosette didn't think Luc would transfer to a no-name school and give up the academy. This reaction was to be expected. The real Cosette would never transfer if she was still here. So even Conrad and everyone in the Black residence were surprised at her abrupt change. And Luc transferred because of her. If Cosette stayed away from him, this would never happen. After all, the real Cosette had always kept things to herself and was aloof to the point Conrad doesn't even think of inviting her to an elite gathering, not that Conrad attended one in the past. So it was the reason the real Cosette didn't become friends with the Quins, despite having the same circle of friends. Well, the real Cosette didn't have friends. She never considered the relationships she had as friends. For her, they were all connections. Cosette glanced at Luc and pursed her lips. He was still in a terrible mood, doodling in his one and only notebook. So I guess, she smiled and thought she still ended up with the inevitable. I really hoped Maxen and Cosette will not be part of the Devil's Den since we only appeared in Volume 2. But well, it can't be helped. I already tried my best not to interfere much with the story aside from taking out the villain. Staring at Luc's frown, her eyes softened. Although Luc could be quite annoying and put her in a difficult position, she couldn't get mad at him. Deep in her bones, she knew Luc was a kind person, and he was acting this way because this guy had always craved attention. Sadly, Asher gets everything because he was the heir. That was the main reason their relationship got strained. It was misunderstanding after misunderstanding. Just a little patience, she thought, and her gaze eventually caught Luc's attention. A sweet smile turned up on her face when Luc returned his gaze. And a little understanding, it won't hurt anyway. Luc's frown faded as his brows elevated at the smile she was giving him. He pressed his lips into a thin line and looked away, hiding the blush on his cheek. Did she fall for me now? He wondered and snuck a look at her once more. This time, however, Cosette had already shifted her focus and continued writing in the notebook. He frowned, but still planted his hand across his chest to feel his racing heart. It felt the same as he felt yesterday when they were in the pool area of their mansion. There was just something in Cosette's smile that was so special and sincere, and it was contagious. Gosh, he scratched the back of his head as he bit his lips to stop himself from grinning like a fool. Why do I feel so happy, as if she just accepted my proposal? Meanwhile, as Luc tore the page of paper to write properly, Maxen glanced at her. As soon as he did, he caught Cosette looking in Luc's direction and the latter blushed. When Cosette chuckled weakly and shifted her focus on her notebook, Maxen caught the type of smile that was plastered across her face. This girl, he thought and sighed, understanding why Luc was blushing like a fool. It was not like Cosette's smile was flirtatious. Her smile was sincere that matched her beautiful eyes. I bet he misunderstood her, he thought, thinking he never misunderstood Cosette's intention, well, sort of, but not romantically, more like he didn't want to believe her pure intention in the past. I'm going crazy with that guy, he thought, ruffling his hair in distress. One thing Maxen was certain, he would have to interact with Luc more than he would ever wish in this lifetime. He disliked the guy, but Cosette was kind to him and already considered him a friend. It was not like Maxen was jealous, maybe a bit. But the point here was, just like what happened during lunch, he was certain that wasn't the last time. There would be more times he would act out of impulse, and Maxen feared it. He didn't want to act as if he had the right or act super annoying. He didn't want to become territorial or make her feel uncomfortable. I hate this. Cosette accepted the backstory would change for a bit, and she might get tangled more in the first volume. Luc was in a good mood because of Cosette's smile, drawing hearts in the corner of his notebook, and then Maxen was in a gloomy mood. And with that sort of mood the three of them bore, the class ended. RING. Cozy, do you have plans after this? Asked Luc as soon as the school bell rang. Huh. Do you want to date? He suggested with his lips stretched from ear to ear. We can go to our house. Luc, Cosette scrunched her nose slightly while putting her things back inside her bag. Don't we have tons of homework? I don't usually hang out somewhere after school. Luc frowned but didn't push his luck this time. All right, then do you want to take a ride with me? I can take you home. I'm riding the bus with. Cosette trailed off as she saw Maxen rise from his seat and walked away. Max, wait for me. She gasped and sprung up out of habit, rushing to follow Maxen, or he would leave her for sure. Luke, who was surprised by this, blinked countless times. However, before he could process Cosette's action, a hand grabbed the back of his collar and dragged him with her. "Luke, Max will leave us if you idled like that," Cosette complained as she looked back, dragging him while Luke barely kept up with her with his upper body bent over. "Did she come back for me?" He wondered, eyes on her back, unbothered by how he was being dragged. He didn't even notice Cosette swiftly took his bag and was carrying it in her hand. A subtle smile slowly reigned over Luke's face before he held her hand that was holding his collar. Cosette looked back on instinct, only to see his smirk. "Cozy, why are you panicking?" Luke guided her hand down, jogging until he was beside her, keeping her hand in his grip. "Is this some sort of drill? Goodness, that rude jerk." Cosette's eyes went round when Luke picked up his pace while holding her hand. He looked back at her and grinned arrogantly. "Faster, or we won't catch up to your friend." And with that, Luke held her hand securely, running and walking since Maxen seemed to be purposely walking faster. They would stop from time to time and slow down, but all the way, he never let her hand go. The reason they were in a hurry might be something Luke didn't approve of, but it was all right. Cosette wasn't like everyone else. Although she had always made clear Maxen was her friend and seemed to have favored him more than him, she still returned to him, even when she was in a hurry. And honestly, that was good enough for Luke. At the very least, he didn't feel like he wasn't just a second option who could be left behind just because there was a better one. He felt like he was equal. He was also her friend whom she would cherish, just as how she cherished other people. In the end, Luke and Cosette caught up to Maxen, and in silence they walked to the bus stop. It was the usual routine Cosette and Maxen had, but this time they had a company. Luke didn't complain, though, nor did he berate Maxen much. With that being said, the three of them rode the bus home. Both Maxen and Luke got off at the bus stop. She would get off and walked her home. It baffled her, but she didn't mind. Cosette pivoted on her heel and faced the two of them as soon as they arrived at the gates of her house. But she instantly frowned when Maxen spoke. "I will go now." Maxen waved as he faced the other way while Luke smiled at her. "My ride will be here soon. I don't want to spend another second with him." The second Luke finished talking, Cosette's under eye twitched when a speeding black sedan suddenly stopped behind him. "See you tomorrow, Tilda, or I will text you later." And before Cosette knew it, Luke already jumped inside the car, which instantly sped away. Meanwhile, Maxen was already walking away. She tilted her head when the car abruptly stopped and then moved in reverse, halting beside Maxen. "What the?" Cosette trailed off, watching the back passenger seat open, and then Maxen was pulled inside by surprise. "Did I just witness an abduction?" "Babe, babe." She snapped her eyes when another car honked at her, and her face brightened up. It was Conrad's car. "Papa," she skipped her steps to the side, pretending she didn't see Luke abduct Maxen just now. Author's note: there will be a mass release, 5 chapters on May 20. Chapter 54, A Father's Advice. "Hey." Maxen held his breath as soon as he raised his head after getting pulled into the car. The second he did, Luke already raised his chin arrogantly as he settled in his seat while the car sped away. "What do you think you're doing?" Maxen inquired in disbelief as he processed what had just happened now. "What I'm doing," Luke scoffed and tapped his temple with his index mildly. "This young master here is being smart. That's what I am doing." "What?" "I need to make sure you will not go back to their house," Luke exclaimed while looking at him in dismay. "Who knows what you will do? You can just change your mind and walk back to their house and ask them if you can stay over. I can't let that happen." Maxen's mouth opened and closed, but he was too flabbergasted at how his mind worked. He could only pinch the bridge of his nose before looking back at this spoiled brat. "Are you always like this?" he asked in disbelief. "If you are so afraid of me going back there, why didn't stay then? It's not like staying is a problem with you." "I don't want to annoy her too much." "You don't want to annoy her, so you're bothering me." "I'm not bothering you, I am making sure you will not bother her." Maxen ground his teeth as his head throbbed. Would he even win against such a stubborn person? Clearly, Luke didn't know him, nor did he know his distant relationship with Cosette. It was not like Maxen wanted Luke to even know, but this person just do whatever he wanted. Another deep exhale slipped past Maxen's lips and just nodded. "Stop." He peeked at the window and they were already far from the Blacks' residence. "You can drop me here, I will go home." "No," Maxen balled his hand into a fist as he glared at Luke. The latter simply arched a brow, arms crossed. "I need to make sure you will not go back there and bother her," Luke repeated with a nonchalant shrug. "I will take you home." "No need." Well, if you don't want that, you can always jump because this car isn't stopping anytime soon. Maxen felt his blood shoot up to his head before he exhaled sharply. Seeing Luke's indifferent expression, he knew this guy had already decided. This car won't stop even if he asked the driver to stop. Whatever, he huffed and tossed his back against the leather seat, setting his eyes on the window. Are all rich kids like this? Once they decided, that's it. Huh. Maxen glanced at him and shook his head mildly. Never mind. Hey, I'm doing this for my peace of mind and I'm not denying that. But how can you act as if I'm extorting you? If you think about it, I am helping you save a few pennies by giving you a ride home. Luke clicked his tongue as he glared at the person sitting on the other side while he was on the other. Goodness, this guy. I don't understand why Cozy likes you so much. As soon as Maxen heard Luke's last remarks, the vein on his temple protruded in anger as he set his piercing eyes back on him. I should be the one asking that. Why does she like a brat like you so much? He retorted, making Luke's blood boil. What did you just say? Luke scoffed. Did you just call me a brat? Yes, a spoiled brat like you. And what do you think you are after calling me that? A poor brat? What? You're poor and a brat. What's there to like about you? You. Invisible fire blazed in the back passenger seat of the car as the two glared daggers at each other. Meanwhile, the poor driver in the front kept glancing at the rear mirror. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva before he discreetly pulled up the partition to give the lovers some privacy. Spoiled brat, Maxen spat out before he looked away since he didn't want to resort to violence. Luke clicked his tongue as he also looked away. Cheap brat. The two were smoldering in anger, yet they kept it to themselves. In Maxen's head, he didn't want to raise his fist and beat this guy to teach him a lesson. That would upset Cosette. Worse, it would put a strain on their friendship. This is probably his tactic, he thought. Anger me until all I can see is red, so that girl will pity him. Meanwhile, Luke was grinding his teeth in anger, but held it in. He kept telling himself this person was Cosette's dear friend. If we fight now, I'm certain his fat won't even save him, but Cozy will surely pity him and think I'm the one who initiates it. Damn it, he grumbled internally, glaring daggers at the speeding cars on the highway. Did he think I enjoy spending another second with him? If only Cozy doesn't like him, I won't even bat him an eye. It's annoying. The two boys both kept their sentiments and traveled in silence. Since Luke didn't know Maxen's address, he simply dropped him off at the bus stop where he would usually get off. They didn't even speak a word to each other until they parted, but instead glared daggers as the parting greeting. Black residence. Papa, did you hear Luke transferred to my school? Cosette broke the silence while she and Conrad were having snacks in the garden while she was doing her homework. Conrad, who was sitting opposite the round table across from her, snapped his eyes from a document. Since Cosette was doing her homework, he thought he would also read a few documents he needed to review tonight. Yes, he answered after a few seconds as he set his eyes on her. Maynard called me. His expression turned sour as he remembered the abrupt call he received while he was working. He could still remember Maynard Quinn's evil laughter as he called him co-parent-in-law. Whenever Conrad remembers it, his blood still boils as he had the urge to mess with the Quinns. How dare they seduce his daughter? Oh, Cosette rocked her head, unaware of the evil plan her father wanted to devise in his head. Why is he bothering you? Asked Conrad. No, she shook her head almost immediately. I'm just a bit surprised, but it's not like Luke is bothering me. Actually, I think it's a good thing he transferred. Conrad arched a brow as he placed his hand that was holding the document on his lap. It's a good thing. I mean Luke and his big brother Asher always get compared. Since the people around them are the same circle of people, their comments are more harmful than what they actually thought, she explained as a matter of fact and then shrugged. I'm not saying there wouldn't be any bad opinion about this transfer, but at the very least, Luke gets to breathe and have a time off from the pressure. Also, I think Luke will get along with our classmates well, she added and smiled, thinking Luke was actually very social and the crowd's favorite. Their opinions will not matter if Luke gets a circle of friends who will like him for who he was, and what he can do instead of pressuring him to be just as excellent as someone else. I hope this decision will make him happy, since that is more important. Conrad's eyes softened as he looked at her sweet smile. His anger towards the father and son was slowly quenched, or rather, it all shifted to Maynard since he was the one raising Luke. You make me proud, Cozy. Conrad sprawled his arm over the table and bent over to pat her head. He even flinched at his actions slightly, but her smile made him relax as he ruffled her silky hair. Although I'm concerned, she spoke while Conrad retracted his hand from her.
Of.
Maxen and Luke, she answered almost immediately. Max doesn't trust easily, and he gets easily annoyed. I blame all those people who wronged him. Meanwhile, Luke can be a little arrogant and insensitive. The two of them had already shown clear dislike towards each other and… Cozy, called Conrad, stopping her sentiments. Her brows rose while he let out a shallow breath. I know you mean well and you want the two of them to get along. However, a bridge doesn't move just so people can cross it and reach the other end. The bridge is only there, and it's the people's choice whether to cross it or stay where they are. You're only the bridge. Hand them the decision if they will meet halfway or stay where they are, he added and smiled subtly. Because at the end of the day, you cannot change or help anyone if they didn't want to change or help themselves. Cosette pursed her lips as she looked at him in awe. She cupped her cheek and blinked twice. Papa, why haven't you dated yet? She blurted out as she couldn't believe no woman had ever seduced this man who was almost the epitome of perfection. Her question, however, made him cough, as that was abrupt and unexpected. Conrad looked away while clearing his throat. I'm busy raising my daughter. Papa, she chuckled as she studied his side profile, although his answer made her happy. There was this inexplicable part of her that was afraid he would marry someone else. It was as if she wasn't ready yet, and Cosette couldn't even understand this sentiment in her heart. Don't worry, I will take care of you in the future, she reassured with a smile while Conrad looked back at her and also smiled subtly. Don't get married for the next 50 years, and you can do that.
Hey.